Okay, this is the much promised presentation on tone in business writing. First, we need to define what we mean by tone. Tone, we'll say, is attitude expressed in language. What this means is the attitude toward the subject, the world, and especially the reader. Writers are responsible for creating the tone of any piece. Readers are the ones, however, who are in the driver's seat. Readers perceive tone. Readers decide what's an effective tone and what's not. So when you write, you're going to have to ask yourself a set of questions in order to establish and maintain an effective tone. First, you ask yourself, why am I writing? In the big sense, am I writing to inform, to persuade, to request information, to order somebody about, to instruct? Then there's the more narrow question of, what do I want from this piece? If you're writing a job application letter, your overall goal may be to get a job, but that's not what the letter is going to give you. The letter may give you the opportunity to have an interview. That's what you can get from the piece, and that's all you can expect. And your tone can reflect that, can see what is realistically possible with any particular document. Finally, you need to ask, who is your audience? And many failures of tone come about because people don't understand their audience, they don't know them, they don't know their concerns, they don't know whether their audience knows them or not, they haven't specified the audience carefully enough. There are all sorts of ways in which you can misunderstand or not know your audience. Who is in control of your writing? Your reader. I said this earlier. Your reader is in the driver's seat. Your reader decides whether to read something. Your reader decides whether to finish something. Your reader decides whether to respond to what you write. All of these things are in the control of your reader and not in your control. Failures of tone come about when writers think they're in control, but in fact, readers are the ones who control the effect of a piece of writing, even if, in a sense, the writer is in the position of power, such as in the case of a boss writing to a subordinate. So let's take a look at one common area where tone goes wrong. That's person, whether to write in first person, second person, or third person. Let's start with third person. Many people have been told in school that academic writing is formal and that formal writing is in third person. So don't use first person in your writing. If you've been told this, well, it's reasonable, but it's wrong. I think teachers tell students to write in third person only, or to avoid first person, because third person is safe. You're rarely going to step on anybody's toes by writing in third person. However, you run the risk of being a bit too formal, a bit too impersonal, a bit too standoffish. There are lots of times when you want to write in third person, when you're writing about objective things, when you are trying to provide technical information, but it's not always the case. So if you think about person, think about the writer and reader in a room. Third person involves the writer and reader at opposite ends of the room. Perhaps the writer is speaking very loudly in order to catch the reader's attention, or they're speaking in such a way that the speaker has a monotone voice. There's a lot of distance, a lot of impersonality there. The first person, the I or we, is friendlier, it's inviting, it's familiar. It's also a bit risky. If you think of it in terms of proximity, the first person means that the writer is in conversational distance from the reader. The second person, you can imagine the writer being very close, uncomfortably close to the reader. In general, the second person is the riskiest of all persons to adopt. If you write you do this, you do that, you should think this, you should think that, you have a kind of parental or authoritative role, potentially threatening, potentially controlling. I can write in the second person when I'm writing a syllabus because I'm the one in control in the sense that I'm commanding. On the other hand, you are in control in the sense of a student who can decide whether to do the assignments or not do the assignments. And sometimes writers who think they're in control find that they're not really. So many business documents are written in first person. Relatively few, aside from instructions and manuals, or maybe letters firing people, are written in the second person. So let's get specific. What are the major problems of tone in business writing? The first, and maybe the greatest problem, is insincerity, not saying what you mean, or saying what you don't mean. This doozy of a sentence actually was in a long letter sent by the CEO of Microsoft to all of the employees of Microsoft about all the new right-sizing and aligning and advantages they were going to take in the future. This sentence and many, many other positive, wonderful, happy-sounding sentences came right before a sentence announcing that Microsoft was going to lay off up to 14,000 people. This is a massive failure of tone because the whole optimistic tone that was part of most of the letter was at complete odds with the actual message of the letter, which is, you might get fired. Almost everybody reading that might have been fired. They didn't know who was going to get fired, and so everybody reading it freaked out. And of course, many of them sent the letter to media, and the CEO of Microsoft was, I think, duly embarrassed because the readers decided to take that and respond to it by shaming the executives of Microsoft about their insincere, cloying letter. Negativity. Well, that's a failure of tone too. You don't want to be negative even if you are giving bad news, even if you're firing somebody. If somebody is late to my class all the time and I say your continual lateness is wrecking my class, that doesn't help them or me, and it's unlikely to bring them to class on time. On the other hand, if I say that we can have a much more successful class if everybody shows up on time, I depersonalize it a little bit, I don't put the reader on the spot, and maybe the person will show up. I don't know, but in an initial attempt at fixing things, it's certainly better to be positive than negative. Note that I want to be positive even though I'm the one who has the power as the teacher, even though a student who's late all the time is in fact disruptive to the learning process and so forth. I still want to be respectful and kind and positive and looking toward a solution. Another failure of tone is people who make demands that they can't reasonably make. Let's say you have a job and you have to take a day off because of some family obligation. Well, you can't demand to take the day off, and you can't put the problem on your supervisor, or I suppose you could, but it's not going to get you very far. Instead, you might consider saying a little bit about what's making Thursday difficult for you and offering a solution. Perhaps your supervisor will ask you to find the person to change the shifts with. You don't put it all on the person. I sometimes get emails from students saying, I am complaining about my grade and I need to meet with you tomorrow. Well, okay, well, a student asking me for a favor shouldn't tell me when to meet. I mean, that might seem a little bit snobby on my perspective, but that's how things work in the world of work and professional life. If you can't make demands, you shouldn't make demands, certainly not in writing. Pomposity is another great sin of tone. Pomposity is kind of a form of insincerity. It means using words that are too elevated for the occasion. If you're applying for a job and you write a sentence like this, the person who writes a sentence like this might think they're just saying how great they are, but in the process, they're insulting the job, and they're using words that are too big for the occasion. Better to use fewer words, simpler words, and more straightforward words. Okay, finally, what are the basic goals we want to achieve with respect to tone? We want to be sincere. Sincerity means two things. It means being honest, that is to say, saying what you mean. And it means being straightforward, that is to say, not saying what you don't mean. These are flip sides of sincerity. You don't want to BS. You don't want to be dishonest. At the same time, you don't want to be so straightforward and so honest that you say everything you mean. It doesn't mean that you have to be brutally honest. You just have to be straightforward and truthful. You also want to be positive if you can be. And most importantly, tone pays attention to the reader. Tone puts the reader first. Some business writing texts call this the you attitude. I want to say you want to write a readerly text, a text that is designed with the reader in mind. This means that you use language that the reader is familiar with, that the reader is comfortable with. You don't use the words that you love the best, but if possible, the words that are part of the native store or the workplace environment of the reader. You also want to respect the reader's time. Frankly, most readers have too little time. They don't want to take time to read your work. This is a pity, but it means that you should not use extra words. And you want to reflect the reader's concerns, the reader's values. Okay, that's tone in a nutshell. I hope this is helpful, and talk to you soon.